There's no shortage of stories told within the World of Warcraft, whether that be the major plotlines crafted for its main characters to follow in each expansion, or the quieter tales told through smaller quest lines. Oftentimes, the most memorable parts of the world come from the latter, short stories created by Blizzard's designers to fill out each area of the game, yet take on a life of their own and become something more. Such is the case with Mor'Ladim, an enemy infamous since the early days of vanilla that every Alliance player who quested through Duskwood will likely have memories of. So, what's his story? Well, let's take a look at the Tragedy of Mor'Ladim. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly ask you to like this video if you enjoy it, and subscribe for more in the future. You can also ring the bell if you want to help my content get noticed by the algorithm old gods. Some time ago, I was investigating the activities of a necromancer supposedly taking refuge in the Ravenhill Cemetery in Duskwood, when something odd caught my eye. Just outside of the cemetery fences, past the Forlorn Row, a small grave stood alone. Though I could see a headstone, it was roughly carved from wood and hastily stuck in the earth, not etched in stone as all the others were. Curious, I approached and knelt before the grave. The weathered grave marker reads simply, Morgan Ladimore. Upon further examination, I noticed that dirt over the grave has been recently disturbed, and that a good amount of the dirt seems to have been displaced. Well, given how many corpses have risen from their graves here, an empty, barely marked one doesn't seem too surprising in this cemetery. And yet, something about this grave speaks to me. The name Morgan Ladimore recalls something deep in my mind. Maybe an old legend or some tall tale I heard in a tavern somewhere. My curiosity gets the better of me, and I ride back to Darkshire to seek out the town's local historian, Sira von Indy, tending to his books within the town hall. He says, Morgan Ladimore. Ah yes, of course. His was a long and sorrowful tale. I knew him, well, before he left for the war, but that was the last time I saw him. A noble and good man he was, but he suffered a bad end. Here, I should have something here that can tell the tale better than my own recollections. He searches through the shelves and comes up with a leather-bound book. If you would like to know more, you might ask Althea. She's been the one to handle the trouble with him of late. Von Indy hands me the tome that he pulled from the shelves, the title, The Story of Morgan Ladimore, engraved into its cover. It seems barely used, leather smooth as I run my thumb along the name. This man must have been some great hero to have a book written about his deeds, or the subject of a horrible tragedy. Before leaving the town hall, I plop down in a chair in a corner, crack open the book, and begin to read. Morgan Ladimore was a great and noble knight who fought in defense of the innocent, the poor, and the afflicted. For many years, he worked diligently throughout the outlying areas of Azeroth, bringing relief to the suffering and swift justice to evildoers. He was married to a young girl named Liss in the summer of his 18th year. They were much in love with each other and would eventually produce 3 children, a son and 2 daughters. Morgan was 32 when the war broke out in Lordaeron. Morgan was called to the side of the legendary paladin, Uther the Lightbringer, to fight against the orcs and the undead. Leaving his wife and children in the safety of his home, Morgan left for war. The years passed, and the war dragged on, and Morgan would witness many horrific events, including the disbanding of the Paladins of the Silver Hand, the death of Uther, and the spread of the plague. The only thing that kept him from the brink of madness was the knowledge that he would someday be reunited with his wife and children. Morgan would eventually return to his homeland, but find it nothing like how he remembered it. The once verdant forest was corrupted and teemed with the undead and other dark forces. Destroyed houses and farms could be found everywhere, and the cemetery near Ravenhill now dominated much of the area. A shocked and bewildered Morgan eventually made his way to his home, only to find it in ruins. Not knowing what had befallen his homeland, he headed towards the village to find answers, and he hoped his wife and children. Morgan inquired about his family but could not find any answers. A priest in Darkshire, as it was now called, said that he might search the cemetery at Ravenhill for a gravestone. Morgan refused to believe that his family was dead and continued to search every farm and house in Duskwood, but to no avail. Morgan rode from Darkshire to nearby Lakeshire, thinking that perhaps his family had fled. On his way there, he decided, against his better judgment, to stop by the Ravenhill Cemetery. Morgan spent hours walking amongst the gravestones. He recognized the names of people that he knew and became more and more distraught. And then he saw them, a small, untended plot amongst the many, with 3 small gravestones. A feeling of dread washed over him as he approached. Morgan brushed the dust from the most prominent gravestone to reveal the name on it. Simply carved upon the grave, letters spelled out his worst fear. Liss Ladimore, beloved wife and mother. Morgan's apprehension turned to dismay, and then to grief, and he fell on his knees weeping. For hours he stared at that one grave, begging the cold stone for forgiveness and sobbing apologies. Then, hours later, something in him snapped, and he began to lash out. He brought his sword out of its scabbard and began to rain blows on the gravestone, screaming in rage. Blind in his fury, he lashed out and swung wildly, catching the notice of a trio of the cemetery's attendants. As they tried to restrain him, he turned his focus to them, hurling accusations of guilt upon the innocent attendants, then killed them all. Later, when the rage had passed, realization crept into Morgan's mind, and he saw his bloody sword driven into the chest of one of the attendants. Driven to the brink by his emotions, he removed his belt knife and plunged it into his heart. Morgan Ladimore's body and the 3 bodies of his victims were found the next day. He was quickly buried, without ceremony, in a hastily dug grave on the outskirts of the cemetery. Because Morgan committed murder against innocence, something that went completely against his beliefs and his nature, and because of the grief that he held in being unable to save his family, Morgan could not die a peaceful death, and lived on as one of the restless dead. Only days later, his grave was disturbed, and his body could not be found. The being that was Morgan now wanders Duskwood, consumed by his grief over the loss of his wife and children, and his own self-hatred. Mor'Ladim, as he now calls himself, roams Duskwood with mindless vengeance and hatred, and has been known to commit murder indiscriminately. Ah, I see. The conflicts on Azeroth these recent years have brought unimaginable pain to so many. It's tragic to see a man such as this fall to despair and hurt the innocent. On Von Indy's suggestion, I head out of the town hall and speak with Night Watch Commander Althea Ebenlock. She says,
Morgan Ladimore? Never heard of... Oh, you mean Mor'Ladim. I guess you haven't heard the story? Well, I'll give you the short version. A powerful undead calling itself Mor'Ladim has been wandering Duskwood. From what we've gathered, it appears to be the undead body of Morgan Ladimore, of whom you apparently know. He's been causing us all sorts of problems, attacking watchmen on patrol and killing people.
She sizes me up.
You seem to be capable enough. Maybe you could lay him to rest. From what my scouts tell me, Mor'Ladim wanders throughout Duskwood, following a strange and meandering path through the cemetery. We buried him out past the house on the hill. You know where that is? There isn't anything I can do, but I wish you good luck.
Oh, well, I appreciate the vote of confidence. This won't be my first rodeo, nor my first tortured soul that I've helped find peace. So I accept Ebenlock's quest and ride back towards Ravenhill. There, I burn my way through the cemetery, searching for this Mor'Ladim, but, well, he wasn't difficult to find. I had heard legends of this fellow, a towering undead knight clad in golden armor, skulking through the cemetery and cutting down unsuspecting adventurers and those just there trying to pay their respects. He lived up to the reputation, lumbering through the graveyard and eventually making his way back to his own grave, staring at it vacantly before turning to make his rounds again. To think this monster used to be such a hero. I should put him to rest so he can be with his loved ones once again. I stand my ground, using my magics to freeze and burn his bones, conjuring burst after burst of arcane force in hopes of shattering his broken body. This battle was a difficult one. Mor'Ladim's kept much of his fighting prowess from life, and I get the feeling that I was not the first mage he'd attempted to cut down. But eventually, I emerged victorious. Kneeling before his corpse, I take his skull and separate it from his body. The rest of his bones crumble to dust and blow away in the wind. I return to Commander Ebenlock, who seems shocked by the news.
I don't blame you if you're having trouble with him. Some of our strongest watchers have been lost to Mor'Ladim. You killed him? That is no small accomplishment. On behalf of the people of Darkshire and the Night Watch, I thank you. There is one small matter, however. I should have told you this earlier. How do I put this? Morgan may have believed that his family was all dead, but in fact, his daughter Sarah Ladimore is now a watcher. She's always been troubled by the circumstances surrounding her father's death. Perhaps you could bring the news to her.
One of the Ladimore children yet lives? That's both horribly tragic and wonderful news. Nodding to Commander Ebenlock, I search the town for Sarah, finding her patrolling its streets. I stop her outside the Scarlet Raven Tavern and inform her of the bittersweet news.
Yes? My father.
Her eyes become downcast.
I wish there was something I could have done for him. If only I could have talked to him before he... Here, take this and lay it on his grave. Maybe, somehow, he'll know that I'm okay, and that none of us hold him responsible for what happened.
There are tears in her eyes now, as she slides a ring from her right hand and presses it into mine.
And thank you.
With that, I ride off to the Ravenhill Cemetery for a final time, weaving my way to Ladimore's grave and again kneeling before it. Another presence is here with me. I hear it silently in the back of my mind.
Leave me be.
I take Sarah's ring from my bag and place it on the grave, moving some dirt over it and patting it firmly down. A ghostly voice sounds on the wind.
This is Sarah? Could it be she's still alive? The weight is removed from my shoulders. You, take my sword, Arceus. As my soul is put to rest, I have no more need for it. It was forged to do good, and though I have proved myself unworthy to hold it, perhaps you will carry on the light through it. This, my love.
The sword that fell from Mor'Ladim's corpse begins to glow, and I lift it by the hilt. As I hold the sword, the spectral form of Morgan Ladimore appears above the grave. He says,
My sword Arceus served me well in life, but as at last my spirit may pass from the unhappy existence, I no longer need it. I shall cling to the life of my daughter, and hope that I will find forgiveness under the light for my sin.
And with that, he fades away, a fallen hero now hopefully at peace. What I find so impressive about the Tragedy of Mor'Ladim is that the quest designers at Blizzard had no need to give such a backstory to this mob. He could have just been a scary, hulking monster stalking through the graveyard, but just this little bit of plot gave him character and incorporated him into the world in a wonderful way. Oftentimes, Blizzard takes the completely opposite approach, weaving a storyline throughout multiple zones from the very beginning and influencing the game and its lore in a huge way. Such is the case with the Defias Brotherhood. And if you'd like to know the story behind them, check out my video covering the lore of the Alliance's most iconic, low-level enemy. Also, don't forget to like the video if you enjoy it, and subscribe for more in the future, and ring the bell so YouTube will actually show you when videos go up. I'm also expanding into other social medias like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. If any of those sound like your thing, go follow me for shorter bite-sized slices of the videos. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and until next time.